Friday, the 30th of January, 1948, the flag of the United Nations stood at half-mast. For in India, Mahatma Gandhi was dead, assassinated. And the United Nations representatives assembled to honor a man, not an official head of a state, not a general or a king, but a simple man who, without army, riches, physical magnificence, or worldly brilliance, has been called the most powerful man of the 20th century. And all over the world, hundreds of millions wept because he was gone. Who was he then, this man, that all the world should mourn him? A physically slight man, 5 feet 5 inches tall, who wore a homespun cotton loincloth like the poorest of the Indians, sometimes weighing less than 100 pounds. A man who died possessing only sandals, a pen, a book, and a dollar watch. A man who led an army of some 400 million to victory without raising a gun. A man without the power of wealth or bombs or guns or physical glory. What then was his power? The clues lie in his life. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born in Porbandar, October 2nd, 1869, a small state in western India. Long before Western civilization began, India had a greatness in art and medicine and logic, in poetry, drama, and law. But its finest greatness lay in its immense researches into the meaning of existence, the truth behind appearance. The West found power in nature and called it the atom. India made its researches into the inner world of man and called that power the Atma. And the man who lived the life that demonstrates the power of the Atma is called a Mahatma, a great soul. There was another power in India, the British Empire, epitomized at this ceremony in 1911 by the visiting Queen Mary and King George V. Here in Surat in the 1700s, they established a trading company. And with Robert Clive, who lived here, further established the East India Company. At 18, Gandhi went to England, to London, to study law. And there in the West read the 2 books in which he found the ideas which he felt, if used, would change history. The first was the Bhagavad Gita, known by memory in every village in India. The Gita is one of the most ancient sacred books of India. It recalled to Gandhi the ancient wisdom and beauty of his country, and he called it the Book of Books for the knowledge of truth. And Gandhi found the ideas of his own in the Gita to explode into the tremendous force of his life. As it is inscribed on the towers, good and evil both exist in all that is. But if you love, you strengthen the good in those near you, not the evil. Thus, truth and love are the greatest forces on earth. And Gandhi was to call their use Satyagraha, soul force, truth force, non-violence. And in London, too, he read the Sermon on the Mount. In the Gospel of India and the Gospel of the West seemed touched for him with the same great light. For the Sermon on the Mount also said, "But I say unto you, resist not evil. But whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." And he remembered the millions of India as he read, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." These ideas and these people, brought together by Gandhi, created one of the greatest forces of the human spirit ever seen. These gentle ideas had existed for a long time. Many had believed them. Gandhi's performance was remarkable in that he was now to lead an entire nation in acting on them. As a graduate lawyer, he returned to India, was sent to South Africa, rose to great success and wealth. By 1912, when the great Indian leader Gokhale, whom Gandhi called my political teacher, came to spend a month in South Africa, Gokhale reported to the people in India not on Gandhi the lawyer, but on a Gandhi who had a marvelous spiritual power to turn ordinary men into heroes and martyrs, and that here in Gandhi was a coming leader for India with a new weapon called non-violence, which Gandhi was using successfully to fight South African discrimination against Indians. In 1915, it was this Gandhi who returned to India. He went all over the country. Crowds came to hear him tell of the new force, this non-violent resistance. And as he went all over India, he saw its restlessness that could be used for good or evil. He saw the great human energy waiting to be used for good or evil. Gandhi met Jawaharlal Nehru for the first time in 1916. And at Sabarmati, near the mill town of Ahmedabad, started a center called an ashram. Here in such a center, people came to live with a man whom they felt had a special truth they wanted to see in action. Here now came those who wanted to observe and follow Gandhi's way of nonviolence. For to be nonviolent, Gandhi felt, took a special discipline. The Congress Party, begun in 1885 as a move towards self-government, now met all over India once a year, and now was the central force in the fight for independence. It began with a ceremonial parade, led by animals whose number was the number of the Congress, 52 bullocks, the 52nd Congress. Thousands walked on foot hundreds of miles to these meetings, carrying their own food, sleeping without shelter. 53 elephants, the 53rd Congress. For here at these meetings, they could see their leaders surge out to touch them. The fire in them would be met by the fire in the leaders. Among the leaders who were to work most closely with Gandhi were Motilal Nehru, father of Jawaharlal Nehru. There was Abdul Ghaffar Khan in the center, leader of the huge, warlike Pathans. The wise Raja Gopalachari. Mrs. Naidu, a poet and friend of Gandhi from the World War I London days. Bose, who eventually was to oppose Gandhi. And there was Jawaharlal Nehru, to be first premier of the new India. Here with the Muslim Azad, who worked for Muslim-Hindu unity in the Congress. While the young Muslim Jinnah was here at the beginning of his career. There was Patel, to be Deputy Prime Minister, called the strong man of India. There was Prasad from Bihar, walking beside Nehru. But their leader now was Gandhi. Fervently spoke at the Congress meetings of the program for a new India, of the use of nonviolence. Nonviolence was a great force. It had its own laws. They must be followed scrupulously. The basis of all great changes in government came not with changes in law, but in men's hearts. Men had a more profound need to love and to be loved than to hate and be hated. The power for good in a man or government should be aroused, not the power for evil. In 1921, he began simply with spinning. All over India, speakers began to repeat his message. India grew all the cotton it needed. Indians were unemployed half the year. Why send the cotton to the English mills? Why not spin their own clothes? Home industry would eventually mean home rule. Thus began the khadi, or homespun movement. As long as the peasants spin, he said, they have their self-respect and a measure of independence. This was Gandhi's meditation in action. And spinning bound India together. In the simplest village, in the house of the leaders, all were spinning, as in his house, Nehru. The act alone not so important as the symbol that all in a nation could spin. The nation was one. In 1922, in jail, Gandhi wrote the startlingly truthful Experiments with Truth. Sent out a message of peace, nonviolence, suffering. His wife, Kasturbai, worked with him. The women were being freed. From all parts of India, they marched with Gandhi. Men and women, said Gandhi, neither can be more important than the other. Only when both are present can anything be fruitful, including politics. At the Congress meetings, women naturally understood the way of nonviolence, and it was women who served the once segregated untouchables at Congress meetings. At the Madras Congress, the signs were clearer. India, with Gandhi, was moving toward trying the technique of nonviolence. They all knew it took the greatest self-discipline, a willingness to give life itself. There was a force in men's hearts waiting to be used. By the 1928 Calcutta Congress, there had been some success, some failure with the use of the technique. But Motilal Nehru reminded them again of their growing responsibility. Dominion status was being worked toward. And by 1929 at Lahore, December 31st at midnight, the leaders stood together. Dominion status had not been granted. Now they would work only for complete independence. And now Gandhi was ready for one of the great climactic experiments of his life in the power of the human spirit, the Dandi Salt March. It was in 1930. Gandhi told the people he had sent a letter to Lord Irwin, the British Viceroy, in which he spoke of his opposition to British rule, which, he said, has reduced us politically to serfdom, had even taken from the Indian the right to make his own salt from his own sea, but had taxed that salt when he had to buy it. Let there be a conference to right many wrongs, or he would start a nonviolence campaign. And he himself as a symbol would march to the sea at Dandi and himself break the salt laws by making salt. The Viceroy answered through a secretary, no conference. On March 12th at 6:30 a.m., a slight man of 61 in a homespun loincloth moved against an empire. With 79 disciples, he started to walk the 200 miles from Sabarmati to the sea, vowing never to return to the ashram until India was free. From all over the world, journalists came to report this march. It had been said that one day the spirit would be more powerful than the sword. Would that happen now? The marchers walked 12 miles a day on the dust roads of the countryside. Every village decorated to receive them. From all over India they began coming. Their battle cry was the ancient Sanskrit, Sachameva Jayati, truth alone conquers. With not a single weapon but musical instruments to march to, they marched. They streamed out from the villages to meet him. People knelt in the road as Gandhi passed. Women came out and placed on his forehead the mark of the third eye, the eye of wisdom. Each night they stayed at the houses in the villages, garlanded to receive them. Gandhi leading, gay, happy. Here in this peaceful march, the thousands moving in a non-violent protest, his hypothesis was being proved. Man, given an idea he could believe in, would yet make love more powerful than hate. In different villages, he walked out with his followers, and sitting under the trees, he spoke to the multitudes who assembled. "You will be free," he told them. "This march has power, for it is truth in action. If it is truth, there is one test. Truth finally always conquers untruth. Fear nothing but to fail that truth. Injustice is an untruth." The British had said they alone could make salt, that they could tax salt without giving the right to vote on that tax. "We must reject that injustice," said Gandhi, "but only if we can love the British man and reject this act as a disease of a man whose health we believe in." They were disobeying the salt laws only after they had first given them every chance. They had tried for arbitration, mediation. That was India's way. They had earned the right now to call the act evil and to make this non-violent protest, this march to the sea. But he warned them. They were coming closer to the sea now. Let them beware against fighting evil with hate. Not lift one finger against the British, or the whole purpose of the march, the great demonstration of their truth power, would be lost. The power would go out of them. The original group of 79 had now been joined by thousands. The thousands became tens of thousands. And on they marched while the world watched. This army only with banners, marching exultantly, marching steadily, an army armed with hope and trust, marching steadily, gaily to the sound of music, until on April 5th, they reached the sea. And then Gandhi marched into the sea, and from it he took salt water to be refined into salt, breaking the law that said only the British could make salt. All along the shores of the sea, others moved in, and each one took up a container and took out the salt water. Thousands upon thousands all along the shore taking part in the act. Women marched in the streets carrying seawater. At the seashore, it was distilled, water evaporated, salt freed, and piled up. Soldiers came to confiscate the salt. Still more salt was distilled. Mrs. Naidu and Manilal Gandhi, Gandhi's son, led a march on the British salt pans behind a barbed wire enclosure. Even camera shots had to be taken hurriedly. The soldiers beat them down, but no follower of Gandhi lifted a hand against the soldiers. And still they came. Love your enemies. Bless them that curse you. Do good to them that hurt you. Manilal Gandhi and Mrs. Naidu were arrested. And here in this hut, in May, at 12:45 at night, Gandhi was arrested. The American and French protested to the British. The Indian people marched in every town and city. Leaders quit all British-given positions, honors. And the British began lathi charges against the uprising. The lathi was a bamboo stick. Crowds protesting in the streets were beaten back, but still the rule of nonviolence held. No hand was raised against the soldiers, and still the protests went on. Jawaharlal Nehru was arrested. Devadas Gandhi, Rajagopalachari. The lathi charges were continued. Gandhi's followers still opposed with nonviolence. sat quietly in the street under the blows as seen in the foreground. Reject the act, but do not harm the man. Whole towns ceased all cooperation. More than 100,000 went to jail. Millions of peasants made salt. Teachers and students made salt and went to jail. There was no Congress session. All the leaders were in jail. By January 25th, 1931, Lord Irwin announced an end. The people in the streets celebrated. Irwin had announced unconditional release of the leaders. Gandhi was free. Members of the working committee were free. And the crowds heard that Gandhi had conferred with the viceroy and offered tea. He put a pinch of salt in it to remind us of the famous Boston Tea Party, he said. Victory was theirs. Gandhi's truth did have force. The terms of agreement were announced. Civil disobedience to cease. People on the seacoast could pick up and manufacture salt. Gandhi's experiment with the use of human energy of truth force, as he had called it, had shown results. The means had been good, said Gandhi. The ends would be good. His promise had been fulfilled. At the Karachi Congress, Gandhi was selected as the sole Congress representative to go to the London Round Table Conference. And the leader of India prepared for a return to the West. He sailed from Bombay August 29th, saying, "I promise I will not disappoint your trust in me." He was going back to the West for the first time since World War I. He had a deep affection for it. Once asked if he had a message for America, he said, "Yes, give them my love." Did he have any other message for the West? A message, he often said, is not given by word of mouth. It can only be lived. His son Devadas was with him. Gandhi insisted on traveling only as a deck passenger. Spinning daily, with him Miss Slade, his assistant and follower. As always, his needs for happiness were simple. He loved children, was capable of a child's simplicity, laughter. And Gandhi and his party finally arrived at Marseille. Gandhi with his indestructible vitality, playing jokes. Secret Service men had been sent to guard him. He called them his family. On the boat going to London, he still had on only his loincloth and shawl. "You wear +4s, he told a reporter laughingly. "I wear -4s. It was a symbol for all to see that millions in India could afford no more. He arrived in England, and as always on this European trip, there were crowds to see him. Gandhi was delighted to see anyone who came. He talked with everyone. East was not East, and West was not West. A man, he felt, should not glory in the fact that he loved his country, but that he loved his kind. He went to Lancashire, was met by dignitaries. It had been feared he might be attacked because his home spinning movement had taken work from the Lancaster mills. But he went. He wanted to see all he could with his own eyes. At 62. Walking everywhere. Standing in the street, he spoke, "I have not tried to harm you. You have 3 million unemployed," he said, "but we have 300 million unemployed half the year." And they cheered him. He attended round-table conferences. There was talk of separate electorates. English in India to vote for English legislators in India. Muslim only for Muslim representatives. As America could have been divided state by state at the time of the Revolution, India was in danger of being split into such groups as Hindus, untouchables, Parsis, and so on. Gandhi felt unity was essential, that India should remain one in common humanity, not many divided by ancient hatreds. But he could not accept the results of this conference. But in India, the crowds seethed again under a new use of British force. The new viceroy had made arrests without warrant, suspended court trials, political organizations, seized property. Again, 100,000 were in jail. December 28th, on Gandhi's return, the crowds waited eagerly. Mrs. Nehru and Kasturbai waited on the dock. Mrs. Nehru to talk about her husband's arrest, Kasturbai to be with Gandhi. Married to Gandhi when he was only 13, they had grown closer till they seemed one. And India called her Ba, mother, as they called Gandhi Bapu, the father. Wherever he went, there were rejoicing crowds. Everywhere he was garlanded, the traditional garland to show honor and respect, the symbol of love and reverence. Crowds stood waiting to see him. They watched from the tops of buildings. The women were holding up their children to see him. To see a wise man in action gives wisdom and blessing, it is said in India. Crowds surging forward so that his car could hardly move. The cry went up, Gandhi Ji Ki Jai, victory to Gandhi. And Gandhi spoke to these people. I have come back empty-handed, but I have not compromised the honor of my country, he said. There was a way to be free of the new harsh laws, but it must be a non-violent way. If laws were unjust, they would be disobeyed, but not capriciously or from ill will or hatred, but because an evil act must be resisted as diseased tissue must be cured for the health of a man. On December 31st, the Working Committee authorized Gandhi to renew Satyagraha, non-violent resistance. And January 4th, all India heard that Gandhi was arrested. And the Harijan story came to a climax. Gandhi had fought for these people, stayed in their quarters with them like this. These Harijan watching him had been called untouchables for thousands of years, had been by tradition segregated. Now Gandhi gave them the name Harijan, which means children of God. But now, too, he was informed the British had given them a separate vote, and Gandhi went on a fast against this, because he said it was not a political matter, but a moral one. And on the sixth day of Gandhi's fast, suddenly temple buildings that for thousands of years had been closed to the Harijan were thrown open. Ancient buildings witnessed the end of thousands of years of segregation. All India had heard. And a pact was signed swiftly by all the Indian leaders. No one, it said, shall be regarded untouchable by reason of his faith. And now he traveled for 7 months, beginning September 7th, 1932, working for the Harijan, collecting money for Harijan work, for his newspaper Harijan. It is not enough to change laws, he said over and over again. You must change men's hearts. He himself went to live and eat and sleep and talk with the once segregated people. For as always, Gandhi took the way of direct action. There were 700,000 villages in India. Such village life had long been the key life of India. He would work his experiments in the power of the human spirit there now. And so he announced to the Congress leaders. And he went to live with Kasturbai in a village in the heart of India called Sevagram. And all watched to see how the Mahatma would now live village life. People of all religions came to stay there. The Congress leaders came to confer, and people came from all over the world to see him, to sit and talk in Gandhi's simple one-roomed adobe hut, the floor of swept earth, in it a rug, a spinning wheel, a soapbox for a desk. At this center, this ashram, Gandhi was making every kind of experiment. The people of India watched his every move. He was making experiments in improving the food they ate. A cottage held a hospital where the medicine whose ingredients could be grown were studied. He was experimenting with better agricultural techniques. The 700,000 villages were 80% agricultural, using such methods of irrigation as this. Gandhi, with those who came to see him, walked the land, studying every possible use of the land, using the tools and talents they had. Gandhi was everywhere, interested in everything. All action was a search for truth. There was grain to be ground. These villages, said Gandhi, cannot retain freedom if they do not control the prime necessaries of life. All India was Gandhi's house, all that lived his blood kin. He traveled all over, to the northwest frontier, center of the most warlike Pathans. And wherever he went, the people came to see him. But now at the Congress meetings, its leaders were facing new violence in India, new violence in the world. World War II was coming, and Gandhi was being forced back into politics. His experiments with moral force once again to be political experiments. By 1938, there was unrest in the Congress. Munich was coming, and England was threatened with world war. The leaders talked of what this would mean to India's drive toward freedom. Gandhi still pointed out the principles: the means must be good, or the ends would be meaningless. Ends and means must be consistent. India must win only by the highest means. Let's not repeat history's mistakes, he said. Let's make new history. And on March 2nd at Rajkot, for such a principle, he went on another of his famous fasts, fasting against the breaking of a pact. Nehru announced the fast a success. Fasting was then the last resort in the place of the sword. The sword breeds hate. Self-suffering revitalizes the good in the wrongdoer rather than the evil. But only if used for good, never as blackmail. World War II came, violence breeding violence. The leaders discussed their moves at Ramgarh. A country fighting for freedom should be given freedom. But by 1940, there was no move giving independence. The Bose decided for the way of the fighter, and following him were those who were finding nonviolence too difficult, too slow. Improvement is gradual, Gandhi had said. But Bose organized an Indian National Army and led them into violent action. But though honored and cheered at first, he eventually failed. England sent Sir Stafford Cripps on March 22nd, 1942, to confer with the Congress leaders. Gandhi arrived at the meeting. Now 73, he leaned usually on members of his family, whom he jokingly called his sticks. Gandhi came to only one meeting. The Cripps offer included a statement that steps would be taken after the war stopped toward a new constitution. Gandhi called this a post-dated check. Crowds waited to hear what Gandhi would do and say. And Gandhi said now to the British, there is nothing else. Quit India. Quit India was chalked in the streets. The English used tear gas and arrested the Indian leaders, including Gandhi. With him to jail went Desai, whose tomb this is. His ashes lie here. For Mahatma Desai, 24 years his secretary and friend, died in jail. Here, too, was buried Kasturbai. On February 22nd, 1944, Kasturbai, his wife, had died, her head in Gandhi's lap. 62 years they had been together. She had become, said Gandhi, truly my better half. On May 6 of 1944, from this prison, Gandhi was unconditionally released. It was his last jail sentence. During his life, he had spent 2,388 days in prison. Many waited to see him released. On his release, he went to stay at the seashore near Bombay. He was ill, showed the results of a prison fast, of the deaths of his wife and friend, of the growing violence in India, the turning of Muslim against Hindu, Hindu against Muslim, but still he went on working, searching for truth. Endless patience and tolerance was necessary to a searcher for truth. He held meetings for prayer. Our bodies are the real temples rather than buildings of stone, he said. He went to Jinnah's house. If Jinnah would not come to Gandhi, Gandhi would go to Jinnah. For Jinnah was moving toward partition of India. Gandhi pointed out the strength and unity, the weakness that would come from disunion. Let India try marriage before divorce, he said. England, beset in Asia, sent a new mission, the Cabinet Mission. And on May 16th, 1946, this Cabinet Mission offered a plan for the ending of British government in India. Gandhi found it the best the British could do under the circumstances. But the Congress Party and the Muslim League could not agree. And at Bombay, the All India Congress Committee debated acceptance of British plans for a free constitution. Gandhi sat spinning. He was for trusting the British. The leaders spoke. Gandhi believed the Constituent Assembly would work out India's framework to be an independent democracy within the British Commonwealth. It would be no bed of roses, Gandhi felt, but the Congress must not shirk it. Jinnah refused all part in an all-India government. On August 12, 1946, Lord Wavell commissioned Jawaharlal Nehru to form the new government. Gandhi himself was on a third-class train. Violent riots had broken out. Muslims and Hindus were killing each other. Gandhi was heartsick. He went out to speak to the people himself. He was warned that he was in danger from fanatic Hindus and fanatic Muslims. A bomb, a knife would kill him. He would go to Noakhali himself, a district 80% Muslim. Barefoot, as on a pilgrimage of penance, he would walk from village to village, live with the Muslims. He was 77. He stayed with Muslims. Wasn't he a Hindu? I am Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, Jew, Parsi, he said, as he had always said. At his meetings for prayer, the Bible, the Koran, the Talmud, the Gita were all read. The riots quieted. If you ever want to become mad again, you must destroy me first, he warned. The Constituent Assembly met, but without Muslim League representation. Radhakrishnan, the philosopher, Nehru, the leaders, all signed and ratified 2 years later a constitution along Swiss and American lines. The crowds were wild with joy. India was free. Independence Day had come. The Viceroy and Lady Mountbatten, representatives of what could have been an enemy country, made bitter by shedding of blood, rode smiling through the streets, and the people cheered, for England and India were friends. And these were the people whom Gandhi had led into the first victory by a nation of nonviolence. These were the people who had risen higher in the use of nonviolence as a force than any in the world. These were the people who had followed Gandhi in believing that the human spirit is more powerful than tanks and aircraft. But Gandhi had not been at the ceremonies. Pakistan had been declared a separate state. Gandhi spent the day fasting and praying for harmony among the people of India. He sent no message. His thoughts were turned inward. He went on a fast, his last, for Muslim-Hindu unity. As Gandhi took his first sip of juice after the fast, the cries rang in the streets, "Down with communal strife! Hindus and Muslims are brothers! Save the Mahatma!" But the Mahatma was not destined to be saved. He had been staying at Birla House. Each day he held his meetings for prayer. A bomb had been thrown some 10 days before at Gandhi, but he had refused protection. His only wish now was to die without anger and with the name of God on his lips. And so on January the 30th, 1948, at 5 minutes past 5, Gandhi went from Birla House to his prayer meeting. And a man who feared Gandhi's way stepped forward, bowed to Gandhi, raised a gun, and fired. Gandhi fell. "Hey Rama," he whispered. It was the name of God. And so Mahatma Gandhi finished with this life. They dressed him in the loincloth, draped the flag of free India over him. The women wept. 200 men of India pulled the carrier with his body on it. The procession moved out and onto the road to Rajat. It took 5 hours for the procession to go 5.5 miles. Prayers arose. All India wept. At Rajgat, the body burned for 14 hours. The Gita was read. Truth and love, the Gita had said to Gandhi those 60 years ago. The ashes were gathered, put in urns, and sent to 6 continents and to all parts of India. 14 days later, by ancient ritual, there were final ceremonies in all India. Chief was at Allahabad, the sacred place where the 3 sacred rivers met. "The light," said Nehru, "has gone out of our lives, and there is darkness everywhere." But Nehru had gone on to say, "I was wrong, for the light that shone in this country was no ordinary light, the light that has illumined this country for many, many years. And 1,000 years later, that light will still be seen in this country, and the world will see it, and it will give solace to innumerable hearts, for the light represented the living truth, taking this ancient country to freedom." Truth and love, Gandhi had said, are the greatest forces in the world. The urn with Gandhi's ashes came now to the place of the meeting of the rivers. Planes flew over, dropped rose petals. The ashes were brought to a sacred place and given to the rivers and to the land. In jail, Gandhi had written, "In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists. In the midst of darkness, light persists. Hence I gather that God is life, truth, love." The experiments Gandhi worked on all his life go on.